What's going on YouTube? It is Chris from Out West with Chris here on behalf of the KastKing YouTube channel. And today I wanted to talk to you about fly fishing. A lot of people don't know that KastKing actually has a full line of fly rods and fly reels out on the market that you can pick up right now. And they're also coming out with a bunch of new stuff like fly line and some new reel models and some pretty cool innovative stuff for the fly fishing folks out there. We'll touch on that in a little bit though, but today what I wanted to talk to you guys about was how to tie on your fly line, how to set up your fly line on your reel, and a few other tips along the way. For those of you who might be interested in getting into fly fishing, you don't have to be intimidated by how to go about setting up your fly rod. It's actually not that hard. It's all something that you guys can easily do. There are a few knots you're gonna need to know. You're gonna need to know about the concepts of the fly system, and we'll get into that in just a minute. And you're gonna need to know what type of materials you're gonna need. So one of the biggest keys with fly fishing is when you're setting up your fly line and your rod and your reel, what you're doing is you're creating a balanced system. So in order for you to cast your fly line appropriately, effectively, efficiently, you need a fly line and a fly rod and reel that are pretty close to the same weight. So your fly rod will be a certain weight, whether it's a 5 weight, a 6 weight, a 7 weight, or like me in here, I have an 8 weight rod. Your fly reel will also be a certain weight. This is the Katmai. Right there it says Katmai 7/8, okay? So this reel will work for a 7 weight or an 8 weight rod. Now because I have an 8 weight rod and a 7/8 reel, I'm gonna wanna pick up 8 weight line. So when you're setting it up, you're also gonna need a few other things. You're gonna need your reel, you're gonna need some backing, and we'll get into why you need backing in a little bit. You're also gonna need your fly line and some leader material. Now you can get a tapered leader depending on the application, or you can even use monofilament or like a fluorocarbon leader material that's not even tapered, okay? In my case, I'm gonna be fishing for stripers and black bass out in the California Delta, and I'm gonna be using streamers. I have a sinking line on here, so I'm actually just gonna use a 15-pound fluorocoat from KastKing, and that is a fluorocarbon coated copolymer. Gosh, say that fast. Fluorocarbon coated, I can't even do it. Fluorocarbon coated copolymer. So for my particular instance, I'm not using a tapered leader. If you're fishing for trout with like a 6 weight rod and you're throwing dry flies, you will want a tapered leader. So guys, this is gonna be a 2-part video. We're gonna go pretty in depth. We're gonna talk about some stuff. We're gonna do a couple tips here and there. And we want you guys to really learn how to do this on your own. You don't have to go to a professional and have them spool up your line. It's not difficult. Don't be intimidated. It might take you a couple tries on a few of the knots, but you know, practice some on some string or something like that beforehand, and you'll be good to go. Before we dive on into it, one concept that I want you guys to really latch onto is when you're fly fishing, you're not casting the fly, okay? You are casting the line, and the fly is basically just along for the ride. It's a lot different than when we're, you know, casting a baitcaster where you are actually casting the lure. In the case of fly fishing, you're casting your fly line. That's why having a balanced system is so important, or else you're just gonna get out there, be frustrated, not be able to make good loops, not be able to cast any good distance, and it's gonna be really frustrating for y'all. So you're making a balanced system, you're casting the line, and let's get into part 1 of how to set up your fly line. All right guys, so like I mentioned before, we're gonna be setting up our reel, a complete balanced setup from backing all the way out to our leader material, taking into account what weight fly rod we have and what our reel is weighted for. Here in front of us we have a KastKing Katmai fly rod, and our KastKing Katmai reel is 7/8, okay? And you can see that number right there. says Katmai 78. You'll see that number right there on the rod. So that means we want to use, in most cases, a fly line that is an 8 weight to keep our system balanced. The first thing we need to do though is we need to put on our backing. And backing serves a couple purposes. The one thing the backing does is if you get into a big fish, like if you're going after a big fish or you just happen into a big fish, if it runs off your line, you don't want to be limited to the 90 feet or so that's on your fly line. You want to have some reserve line. That's something the backing does. The backing also serves the purpose of filling up the spool so that the fly line isn't sitting directly on the spool. It gives it more circumference around the spool, which actually reduces line memory on your fly line, which is a good thing, and it increases your retrieve rate. So once you get your backing on, you'll put on your fly line, and you will see there is a back end of the line, and then there is a front end of the line as well. And it's typically pretty easy to tell. On this particular line, the back end of it is the line that's the lighter color. The front end is the sinking tip. Now this is a sinking tip, kind of a weight forward line, and that's just how I'm going to be fishing. I'm going to have this set up for fishing streamers and stuff, presentations under the water, wet flies for bass. So that's how I am setting this setup up. If you're going to be dry fly fishing for trout, you're going to be using probably a 6 weight rod and reel and 6 weight line, and you're going to be using floating line. There are several different types of fly line, and those are your intermediate lines, which sink really slow, but they do sink. They don't stay afloat. You have your floating lines. Then you also have your sinking tip lines, and those are for fishing streamers or if you need to fish deep. There are also a ton of other varieties of those lines. You can get, weight forward. So if you're a surf fisherman and you're constantly casting into the wind, a weight forward or a shooting tip, those types of lines will be beneficial to you. In this case, I do have a sinking line. This portion is an intermediate line, so it will sink, but it sinks slower than the tip does, which is a different color. And then I also have some KastKing Fluorocoat, and I'm going to be using the Fluorocoat as my leader material. Sometimes if you're dry fly fishing or you're fishing for a really finicky fish, you might need a tapered leader. In my scenario, I don't really need a tapered leader. I'm going to be using a 12-pound Fluorocoat. The way I'm setting it up is how I'm going to be fishing it. If you're going to be fishing for trout or steelhead, salmon, you're probably going to need a tapered leader. And part of that is how the fly turns over during the cast at that end loop. It's not so necessary because a lot of the stuff I'm going to be throwing is weighted, so it will turn over on its own essentially. Now, in order to get the correct amount of backing on your reel, you could do this 2 ways. The first way is actually spool on the line first and then spool on your backing. That's something you could totally do. I'm going to do it a little bit differently. I'm actually going to spool the backing on, and when I get to a certain point, I am going to stop and test using the line how much room I have between the line and that bracket right here on the frame of the reel. So we're going to take this off so that we can get our backing tied on. We're just popping the spool out. This is a 20-pound Dacron type backing. Typically you're going to be using a 20-pound. 30-pound on occasion. It all depends what type of species you're going for. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a couple wraps around here, and then I'm going to tie a slip knot. This is also called an arbor knot. I have the line coming in. I have my tag end. I'm going to take my tag end, loop it around, and then back through to create this slip knot. And then I'm going to tie a granny knot, essentially, and this turns it into an arbor knot, and this is going to just put a little knot to stop that slip if that makes any sense. And since this is kind of small material, I'm actually going to tie twice. So by tying it twice, it's a little bit bigger. So then I'm going to just sink this, pull this slip knot in on itself. That granny knot is now on there. And now my backing is on nice and tight. Trim off that tag. So now I'm going to take the spool, put it back into the frame, and that is how it'll spool on. Now if you're trying to spool it on and you're hearing the clicks of the drag, that means you are spooling it the wrong way. So you're going to be doing a left-hand retrieve, just a normal retrieve like that. One thing you can do, one thing I suggest you do, is put a pencil or a pen through here so that you can hold this between your legs as you're spooling it onto the line. You're going to want to spool it on tight and also really as even and possible as you can, so you don't have any ridges or humps. You want it to be nice and smooth sitting on the spool. Okay, so we have our backing coming on, and it's coming on pretty quickly. What we're going to do right now is we'll take the fly line. We're actually going to just take this and mash it. This is not a scientific way of doing it. It's just kind of something I've always done. Mash it down, and you can see that there's still plenty of room on the spool. So that means we want to add more backing. So it looks like we have enough backing now on our reel for the fly line to sit correctly with enough room. So I'm going to cut my backing, and then we're going to go about attaching the fly line. Okay guys, I hope you found part one helpful. One thing I do want to point out is a lot of times on your fly reel, the manufacturer will state how much backing you need to put on your spool. Sometimes they don't, and that was the case with the Katmai. So I just used that trick of putting the backing on, smashing down the fly line to make sure I was at the appropriate diameter. I actually could have done a little bit more, but it's not going to be the end of the world. You can also spool on the fly line first, then spool on the backing, but that can be a little bit complicated if you don't have another reel to spool all of that stuff back onto. Thank you guys for watching part one. Stay tuned for part two. We're going to talk about how to attach your fly line to your backing, and we're going to talk about leader material. We're going to talk about a few more knots, and hopefully you'll feel comfortable getting out there, tying on your own fly line, and doing some fly fishing. That's a big